Just a couple of months ago, Herman Cain was told that he had no viable pathway to the Republican nomination for president. Now, he's topped a couple of straw polls and is tied with front-runner Mitt Romney in some surveys. What does the Cain surge mean to the mainstream media? It means it's time to put him in his place. I'm PJTV's Scott Ott, joined by my colleagues Bill Whittle from Los Angeles and Stephen Green from Monument, Colorado. Men, here's how MSNBC, that paragon of diversity, treats the man who could be our nation's second black president.
Mr. Cain, in fact, you were in college from 1963 to 1967, at the height of the civil rights movement, exactly when the most important demonstrations and protests were going on. You could easily, as a student at Morehouse between 1963 and 1967, actively participated in the kinds of protests that got African Americans the rights they enjoy today. You watched from that perspective at Morehouse when you were not participating in those processes. You watched black college students from around the country and white college students from around the country come to the South and be murdered fighting for the rights of African Americans. Do you regret sitting on those sidelines at that time?
Now, the chipper boy on the left was MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell. Steve, you know, it looks like it's pretty clear that Herman Cain was not, as they say, down for the struggle. I mean, what kind of black man goes to college and then goes to work instead of marching on Selma in the civil rights movement?
Yeah, noted black person Lawrence O'Donnell. I know what you're doing here, but I really hate this question. I'm sorry. What kind of black man? How about what kind of man does all that? How about a responsible man? Look, you know, marches are great for calling attention to great issues, but you don't affect real change in the streets for lousy issues. Look at these idiots occupying Wall Street in Washington and everywhere else. They're not going to accomplish anything because they're nihilists. They're spoiled kids throwing a national tantrum. You affect real change in the real world. You know what? How many jobs will they create occupying Wall Street? They'll destroy jobs doing that. How many jobs did Herman Cain save or create, to borrow a phrase, at Godfather's Pizza? And the answer is thousands. So you know what? If we're supposed to judge a man by the content of his character, you don't have to agree with all of Cain's positions, and I certainly don't. But you can still see that this is a man of good character, and we don't have enough of those in politics.
You know, Cain has a math degree from Morehouse College, as was mentioned, and while he was earning his master's in computer science at Purdue during the Vietnam War, he worked full-time developing fire control systems for ships and fighter planes for the Department of the Navy. Now, Bill, in that same interview, Lawrence O'Donnell implies that Cain failed to serve his country in time of war. Do you think that voters will see his civilian service in the Navy as somehow unpatriotic, cowardly, or hypocritical, especially for a guy who touts peace through strength?
No. And this is the mask continuing to fall off the mainstream media as they become more and more irrelevant. And I just want to go back to one thing about you were sitting on the sidelines during the civil rights movement. How many black Americans are there? I don't know the exact numbers, 11 million, 15 million, something like that. How big is that bridge in Selma, Alabama? How many of the people, how many black Americans weren't in that march? That's what I want to know. I want to know what percentage of black America was not in that march. And I'll bet you the number is 99.999 with other decimal places after it. Now, of all the 99.9% of the people who weren't in that march, including, I'll bet you anything, Chris O'Donnell, Larry O'Donnell, whatever his name is, Herman Cain, as you said, was out there preparing to succeed. And his success not only benefited Herman Cain, it benefited probably hundreds of thousands of people, low-income earners at McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken and the pizza place. It's just shocking and disgraceful. And we're not going to see the end of it, buddy. It's going to get worse.
Now, Steve, the Gallup organization calculates something they call positive intensity score, subtracting the strong unfavorable opinions from the strong favorable ones and come up with this number. Herman Cain owns the positive intensity score among voters who know him. And you can see him way over there on the right, but he's about 20 points down in name recognition from the leaderboard and even Michelle Bachmann. Does this bode well or ill for his chances to snare the nomination?
Yeah, I'm not sure, although I wish I'd gotten Bill's question. I could have told the story. Well, I'll tell it right now. I'll tell it quickly. In 1942, my grandfather was offered a commission as an officer in the U.S. Navy, but the War Labor Board told him no because he was running a steel mill that made steel that made the ships for the Navy. So he still contributed to that war effort. But to answer your question, after 8 years of Clinton, we were really tired of Clinton, so we elected the anti-Clinton, George W. Bush. And we got sick of Bush after 8 years, so we elected the anti-W, Barack Obama. Well, it hasn't taken 8 years to get sick and tired of Obama. And this guy, Herman Cain, he's warm, and he's got a story of real accomplishments in the private sector, and he has the ability to speak without a teleprompter. Cain is the anti-Obama. I think that explains the enthusiasm. Now, he doesn't have much of an organization on the ground, and you can only go so far in intensity, but out of a pretty crowded GOP field right now, I think he's the guy to watch. It's an exciting thing.
Stephen Green hosts two of the most entertaining and informative shows on PJTV.com, Hair of the Dog and The Week in Blogs. Every time it makes me smile and I learn something I didn't know. He leads a merry band of followers on Twitter at vodkapundit.com. Well, Herman Cain's dad was a chauffeur and a janitor and a barber. His mom cleaned houses. He has, as Steve mentioned, a track record of success in business, turning at least 2 large money-losing operations into winners. He's an inspiring public speaker with a plan to scrap the tax code and replace it with his simple and fair 999 plan. Bill, how do you think the Obama campaign currently sizes up the threat posed by Herman Cain?
My guess would be that the race baiters in the Obama campaign are looking at the race issue, which is why they sick their attack dogs on MSNBC trying to convince people that he's not black enough. That's what they're concerned about. But what they really ought to be terrified about is his economic record, and even putting that aside, because this election is going to be all about the economy. Here, as you say, a man who took a horribly failing Burger King division, turned it into a winner. Godfather's Pizza, turned it into a winner. It's been an out-of-the-park success in everything he's ever done. They ought to be afraid of that. But the one thing they ought to be afraid of more than anything is the personal character that this man has and his personal story. Because if you take a look at what he's risen from to become what he is, compared to all of the wind in the back of his sails that Barack Obama's had, that would be something I would be utterly terrified of. And Herman Cain is not afraid to say what's on his mind. He's the only people calling out these Occupy Wall Street protesters. So keep an eye on him. I hope he goes all the way.
Bill Whittle's co-founder of DeclarationEntertainment.com, co-host of Klavan, Whittle and You here on PJTV.com, and creator of Afterburner, which dominates the ether like an F-22 Raptor. Well, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said he had a dream. Recently, President Obama tried to stir the Congressional Black Caucus by conjuring the 1960s spirit and calling on them to march again. But Dr. King's dream wasn't about marching or protests or sit-ins. It was about getting a fair chance to pursue your own dreams. It was about working and demonstrating integrity. Herman Cain didn't go to the streets to call for freedom, but he's grateful to those who did. Herman Cain went to work, and he lived the freedom. Each of us has his own calling. By following his, Herman Cain embodied the civil rights movement. Mr. O'Donnell, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. But if you ever need one, you might call on Herman Cain. For Bill Whittle, Stephen Green, and the entire Trifecta crew at PJTV.com, I'm Scott Ott.